It's time to explore your full potential. Through the power of audio, we evolve from a mission. Crafted to last, designed to excite. A balanced act of perfection. Made for those who connect across all nations. Created for those who aim to succeed. Unleash your potential. EPOS, the power of audio.
Hello, and welcome to The Way We Work, which is part of our Bloomberg The Year Ahead series. I'm Mark Millian, technology editor at Bloomberg News. Today, we're looking at how the pandemic has caused a massive disruption to the global workforce and made many of us rethink how, where, and why we work. Large swaths of employees are working remotely around the world. This has accelerated the growing awareness and value of good, clear audio and video to both employers and employees. We will have insightful conversations about this in just a few moments. But before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge our sponsor, EPOS, and to welcome our community from across Europe, Middle East, and Africa and Asia. And also say hello to our audience tuning in on social media and via the Bloomberg terminal. Let's start with a few housekeeping points. For real-time transcription of the event, click the link in the session description to open the Thiston page and follow along. Refresh your browser if you're having any issues with sound or video. Open the event chat box in the bottom right corner if you need support. You can also join the conversation via social media, and we would encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook using the handle @Bloomberg Live or @Business. And you can use the hashtag The Year Ahead. So let's start with introducing our first panel. Joining us this morning, we have Lara Owen, who is the Director of Global Workplace Operations at GitHub. Thank you for joining us today, Lara. Next up, we have Emma Morley, who is the creative director and founder at Trifle Creative. Thank you for joining us today, Emma. Last, but by no means least, we have Melanie Tinto, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer at WEX. Thank you for joining us today, Melanie.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. So we're about to enter year 2 of this big, awful experiment of the COVID era. You're all leaders who oversee big teams, and really, I think for a lot of people, for executives, but really for everyone, there's a high degree of fatigue setting in. Maybe we can start with Melanie. How are you keeping your employees happy and engaged and productive right now?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And we've been focusing quite a bit on employee wellness across the globe for the past 9 months. And obviously, to your point, this is getting long. And so we're trying to find additional ways that we communicate, that we have transparency around where we are, what we're providing to our employees, and we're encouraging the managers to do the same. So if you think about fun activities, whether it's a Peloton ride in the morning, whether it's an opportunity to connect over a happy hour or a coffee chat, we're trying to do fun and uniquely different ways to engage employees and to make sure that we're caring not only about the work and the priorities that they have, but also about them as a total person, as well as their families.
Anyone else have secret techniques?
I've heard some lovely stories from some of our clients here in London where they are, they're either doing, and offering kind of various kind of Zoom, yoga, meditation. There's been a lot of fruit bowls sent across town as well. I've been hearing about that. And I think that, the word fatigue is just so it right now, isn't it? I think we are all absolutely feeling that. And I think that what's really, really important kind of coming towards the end of this phase and this cycle, this experiment, as you say, before we go into the next one is a little bit of resetting, around some of the boundaries I think a lot of boundary lines have been really severely blurred, and I really think it's a great time to just take a moment to really check in with everybody, see where they're at, see what's going on. And as we move into 2021, with the circumstances still challenging for so many people, and just kind of say, right, what have we learned? What was working last year? What were the things that were keeping us all, energized and motivated and organized as well? And how can we, how can we just have a bit of a reset going into the new year to make sure that people are feeling supported?
Mm-hmm. Laura, GitHub was one of the pioneers of remote work, and many people at your company have been doing it for much longer than the rest of us. So what, if anything, did the pandemic change about the way you operate that business?
Yeah, so GitHub's been around for over a decade now, and we're a hybrid work model, meaning we have both offices and remote employees, and about 2/3 of our population was remote. And so we shifted from a remote friendly culture to a remote first culture. And this meant we had to re explore everything we did. Onboarding, for instance, we're used to bringing everybody into our San Francisco office, giving them the physical exploration of our culture. And when COVID hit, that all became virtual. And we re-looked at that experience in whole. And we've actually, from our employee surveys, realized that people enjoy that more than they have, leaving their families and flying to San Francisco to a new place. And they can now get to know their coworkers from the comfort of their own home. But that's also meant that we've had to reinvest in our virtual culture and what are our virtual routines. How do we help people find their virtual communities? And so we've invested in things like Coffee and Beats, bringing artists from all over the world to play half an hour on Tuesday mornings to our employees, and they love that. We're bringing speakers in, astronauts from NASA, coffee makers, teaching people how to make the best coffee at home. We also have crazy Slack channels from #yelling in all cap locks where people can just write whatever they want. It's Friday to personal finance channels, to Taco Bell aficionado Slack channels, and really just helping people strengthen those weak network connections, because that's a lot of what we're losing when we don't have an office to go to. People have scheduled meetings with the people they are most closely tied to or work with, but those people we bump into in the hall, we're losing those. And I think a lot of people are feeling disconnected because of those loss of interpersonal connections.
Yeah, totally. And even after all this time, I think everyone, even people in technology, are struggling to figure out what tools they need to do their best work from home. Like I still don't even have a printer. Laura and I talked about this, and she promised not to gratuitously plug her own product. But Laura, tell us what tech you're relying on.
Yeah, so of course we use GitHub at GitHub. I have a 24-hour team, meaning someone is always awake, whether it's in India or Japan or Philadelphia or San Francisco. So we have to rely on asynchronous communication, and we have to have great tools that allow us, whether it's Google Docs or GitHub, to communicate in writing and make sure everybody is on the same page. I don't think there's any one tool out there, if you're working remotely, that is going to save you or create the best experience. I think we have all the technology we need. It's just how you use it. For instance, if you have your people on your team concerned about work-life balance, Google Calendar offers the opportunity to set business hours. And so pop-ups happen if you try to schedule something at 10 p.m. for someone or 6 in the morning. And that can help managers and coworkers know when you're available, when you're not. Same goes for Slack. There are little meeting icons or little, palm trees if you're on vacation. I think the other thing I like to tell people is, managers and leaders really need to lead by example right now. Early on in the pandemic, our executive team reminded people to take vacations, but then went and took vacations. Same goes for sending emails on Sundays. I have the bad habit of doing that. And so I've set up my email to send on Monday morning so that my folks, my managers will not respond to it because I know they will if I send it out Sunday night. So thinking about how you use that technology and how it works for you and how it sets up the culture you want and the expectations you have is really important right now.
Anyone have tips on lo-fi home work essentials?
I'm a big believer in Post-it notes. Love a Post-it note, a wall and a Post-it note. You just can't beat it. But I think, I think also there's just a couple of kind of ergonomic items that have become really critical is the laptop stand, trying to keep your eyes at eye level. Even, I kind of put that almost above the chair. They're kind of on an ergonomic chair versus the laptop stand or having a screen that at least keeps your head at eye level. It's just so important. I think there's been a huge increase in, issues, back health related issues this year, and that's unfortunately probably going to carry on. So I think that's really, really important. And, also, of course, think about the lighting. If you're either near natural light, try and change your lighting throughout the day. So I've got 4 different types of lighting in this room, alone. That includes natural lighting, which is just to the side, not right now because it's dark and nighttime in the UK, but there would normally be kind of natural light from one side, as well as different types of levels and color of bulbs as well. And types of lighting can just make a really big difference. We're used to being out and about and obviously having different types of lighting throughout the day. So I think that's just really important to remember, especially when we're just kind of stuck in one place.
Yeah, and just to add to that, some of the employees talk a lot about video fatigue. Being on this screen all the time gets tiring. And so we've been encouraging doing walking one-on-ones, have the opportunity to get outside while the weather is still nice, have an opportunity to talk to folks, but not necessarily engage on video. We've been modeling the way with that and really working to encourage employees not only to do that and vary the way in which they work, but also, to Laura's point, taking time away, taking holiday time is really hard now. And we have to encourage folks to take that time. We find that employees are working longer hours by being at home. And so we want to make sure that they have that balance of employee well-being as well as focused on the priorities that they have. That's been the biggest challenge or I think myth that people assumed was you'd work less when you work at home, and you actually work quite a bit more when you don't have an opportunity to unplug, take that time to drive from the office to your home. And so we're encouraging people to take that break as well.
Melanie, I noticed you're the only one on this call in a proper office. Is your company starting a return? You mentioned the one-on-ones. I haven't seen another coworker in quite a while.
Yeah, so we have an opportunity for the offices that are in lower risk areas to have employees sign up and come into the office. I will tell you, there's very few people that take advantage of that. It's a very small number of people that come into the office periodically. We've actually told employees that they are not required to come back until June around the world, so all of our global locations. But what I have found is that when you do come in, say a day or two a week, there's an opportunity to just see colleagues, a few colleagues that might be walking the halls, even though it might be at a distance and with a mask, there's still that opportunity for some social engagement. And so you forget how much you miss that until you come back into the work setting and have the opportunity even to connect with one or two individuals. So it's been a slow return back. I think we'll start to see more people take advantage of that coming back into Q1.
Emma, you run a design firm that traditionally works on big office buildings, but you've had to add a new business this year, right?
Yeah, that's right. There's we actually, I think back in March we kind of five projects disappeared in a week, and a puff of air. We have been working on a couple of commercial projects during this time, but we turned our attention to the home working setup, and we launched kind of an add-on to what we do called Homework. And essentially, that just came about because we were having conversations with all sorts of people and clients about their current situation, what was going on, what was their future workplace strategy. And of course, no one could really answer that at all. And then still, still so many of them can't answer that question. But what they all knew is that they were suddenly working from home for the foreseeable. And I was having a chat with a CEO who was like, on a rickety stool at a table, and I was kind of going, "Oh, that doesn't look like it's going to be too good for you in the long term." And so we just started to explore what were the kind of very simple things that we could be advising our clients to do. First of all, just a whole selection of tips and advice. But beyond that, then what were the products that we knew and would have historically been placing into commercial offices that could very well work in a home setup. So we just adapted what we do, and we're offering home working packages now, as well as also design clinics to help people just rethink. I think what happened back in the early part of this year is everybody was kind of in a bit of a panic, and just, I'll just shove my stuff here and I'll just crack on working. And there's a lot of people that haven't got, a spare room, a spare space, or enough space for, a proper chair or proper anything. And we wanted to really make sure that we were thinking about them too and how we could offer advice. And what we've realized is that there's a few things that everybody can do that will just make a world of difference. So it's certainly not what we ever planned on doing, but it's been really interesting to do, and it's been well received so far.
Yeah, I think many people are working from a kitchen table with a toddler clutching at their ankles. What does an ideal home office setup look like? You mentioned some tips before, and before we started, you told me I needed to get a plant.
Absolutely. I think I'm sure it's a well-known fact. The plants and greenery are just so good for us. It is so good for us to be surrounded by nature, and in the absence of being out and about, we've got to start thinking about bringing that inside, because plants detoxify. They are scientifically proven to help our mental health as well. They help with concentration. They help with creativity. They help with productivity. And actually, there's some that are really easy to look after. There's some that are always going to be challenging, and you always get the argument, "Oh, I can't keep a plant alive." There are plants that everybody can keep alive. And I think that even what we have seen in research is that even just looking at, an image of a beautiful image of a forest or, outdoors or something has a really positive impact on us. Where I'm sitting now, you can't see, but this room, you can probably just about see it's a shade of green, quite purposely. In front of me, what you can't see behind my computer screen, there's a wall which I have wallpapered in a kind of botanical style theme wallpaper. So it's all very leafy. I've got plants on my desk. I've got natural textures. I've got items that are made of wood. I've got items that are that connect me to all sorts of places and spaces as well as inspirational images and other lovely things around me, textures. And I think everybody's different. I know what works for me. And one of the things that we are encouraging people to do when we run the design clinics with them is kind of say, well, what does work for you? We are all different. One of you might hate green. You might be looking at this wall going, that's a terrible color. Why has she done that? it's everything is personal, and it's really important that we just, now that we all know working from home is not going anywhere. Yeah, it is here to stay for the long term, not just for COVID. So therefore, we need to start thinking, what can we do? What can we do with the little space that most of us have got? This space I'm working in, it's not very big at all. It's kind of like, it's a meter and a half. My desk is 1.22 meters, just about. The area around me is not huge, but it is all appealing to me. And when you haven't got a designated space, that's obviously something that we are hearing a lot from people. There's some wonderful little tools, little toolboxes. There's all sorts of people doing some great little kits to help you keep organized. Because at the very least, at the end of the day, if you can suddenly make your space feel like it's a dining area again, that is going to be so good for your mental health. Again, coming back to that kind of argument about boundaries, I think, it's like, just clear it all up at the end of the day. Have a really easy method. Have a cupboard, have a something, have a box, have a whatever it is, something that enables you to clean that space and keep it, change the setting from day to evening is really important as well.
Laura, what does the plant situation look like in your office / guest room?
/ Peloton room. I am a big fan of biophilic properties as well. Yeah, all the essentials. In my home, we have definitely a couple plants. This room doesn't have a ton of natural sunlight, so succulents are great. As we're designing new offices and building them out right now, we've actually doubled our plant budget. So as we welcome people back into spaces eventually, we recognize that plants do have a calming effect. So whether it's a home office or an office, lots of plants. I'm all for it.
Nice. The toddler clutching from your ankle thing I mentioned earlier is based on real life experience. I have twins. They're 2 this year, so it's been a little dicey. I wanted to ask everyone to tell an awkward work from home story, but I'll start. So I lived in San Francisco until a few months ago, and we were the first major city in the U.S. to lock down, I think. Definitely one of the first. And I remember that time was just insanely hard because everything was closed, like daycares, playgrounds, everything. And nobody had any idea what they were doing. And then I distinctly remember every meeting instantly turned into a video meeting for some awful reason. So one of those first mornings, I had one with our whole editing team, and it's my turn to go over like the major news events for my group that week. And just as I'm starting, my daughter is tugging on my leg and insisting she be held. So after like 10 seconds of complete futility, I pick her up and I try to finish what I'm saying. Then maybe 10 seconds later, my son runs up and starts wailing because his sister is getting held and he's not getting held. So I have to pick him up too, obviously. And my kids, they're big kids. My son is like, he's wearing clothes for 5-year-olds right now. So I'm like barely clutching on to a kid in each arm. And it's like really hard to concentrate when you're holding like 50 pounds of child. So I think I just like raced through what I was saying and just exhaustively tried to move on. My colleagues were very nice about it, of course, like, filling up the little side chat in the meeting with Oz or whatever. But I know people have had it much worse. Melanie, do you have a work from home story from this year you can share?
So I'm laughing because as you're talking, there's been so many times, I think this year has been a lot about acceptance. There's been so many times where I've had people on my team that have young children that are, hiding under the desk and they're trying to keep them down while they're presenting to 400 people or 500 people. So I totally can appreciate where you're coming from. I have the benefit of having 2 teenagers. So I have the coffee deliveries coming periodically. So it's a little bit easier when you have 2 teenagers. getting through this for sure. It's the homework and the never-ending, back end on the evenings that is a challenge. But for me, it's inevitably whenever I'm on calls like this, it is the delivery guy that seems to ring that doorbell, and the dog absolutely hates the doorbell. So every time the doorbell rings, it happens to be in the middle of a large call, and I'm praying that I can hit the mute button fast enough to get through it. That, or if my husband burns something in the kitchen and the fire alarm's going off at the same time. So, it's been a little bit easier for me just given the kids' ages, but, I think we've all come to appreciate and accept our colleagues. I think we know a lot more about each other. We've seen their home spaces. We've seen where they work. We've seen how they act. We're okay when their kids, and all of us have hugs goodbye when our kids are going outside or going to sporting practice. There is just a lot more acceptance than there ever was that we truly are everyday human beings, as well as these, colleagues that work really hard. And I think it just brings a total different level of how we appreciate one another and support one another.
Laura, how is your homework situation working out for you?
I mean, I've worked remote. I've been with GitHub for 7 years, so this isn't terribly new for me. But I will embarrassingly admit that while I look very professional up top, I am wearing sweatpants and very comfy socks on the bottom.
Nice.
I believe in work-life balance.
My team calls that the work mullet. They call that the work mullet, where you have direct power, business on the top and sweatpants on the bottom.
That's great. I'm going to steal that.
I'm stealing that.
I love that.
Emma, what about you?
I think I've had a few near misses with kids and family members, but my cat funnily enough was just meowing just before we got on this call, and I was like, oh no, here we go, because generally one of them will meow and meow and meow until I let them in, and that's all fine until then you get this like with the tail like just there under my nose, and you're trying to talk and it's just like swooshing. That's happened quite a few times. But I really agree with what Melanie's saying. I think it's really nice that actually we're all kind of handling the same things, right? We're all humans just trying to make our the best out of what has been an absolute crazy situation this year, and there's something kind of very grounding about that. Actually, it just puts you on a level, and I think it's been the same with when I've been giving presentations to different clients, and you see that they've got the same stuff going on, whether it's deliveries or whatever it is, and I do think it's kind of it's nice to feel connected in that way when at a time when we've all been so disconnected.
Yeah, I think like as people settle into the work from home, at least as an option, I wonder like how will companies even convince people to come back in? Do you think a return will be mandatory? Like Melanie, how are you guys thinking of it now that you've started the phase opening?
Yeah, we've communicated to employees that will never be fully remote, but we do have an appreciation for flexibility, and so there'll be a lot of employee choice in the future. When I think about our teams in particular, the relationship is a really key component, as probably for many of you. And so we're still trying to bridge that gap between how you do that virtually, which I think we've done a nice job, but it can't replace some of that connectedness when we're collaborating, brainstorm, launching a key project in the office. So I think you'll see more when people are coming together for groups or just have offsite meetings. You'll see more in person. But individuals also love the fact that they have focused time, that they're able to really unplug and focus on that critical project. They're able to have more time with their colleagues that are sitting in a remote location. It's much more of a one-on-one equal playing field for those in Australia versus those here in Portland, Maine. It's a much different feel for them. And so they feel much more included in the way in which we work and also in the WEX culture that we have here. So I think part of that, what you'll see is drop-in spaces. You'll see people probably picking a variety of locations with which to work. I think when you're recruiting for talent, there's going to be much more of a demand, particularly for those that have the stronger skills that are hard to find, of having much more choice than historically they may have had. And so if you want to be able to have and acquire and retain the best talent in the marketplace, there's going to be a lot more flexibility in terms of where they work, how they work, and they'll probably be more focused on travel if they work in an alternate location from a corporate headquarters. And so it'll look different. I don't think it'll ever be, completely one or the other. I think they both can work. It's a matter of what fits best for that company, what fits best for the types of employees that they recruit, and what culture is going to match best for that particular audience. So you see some that want to work entirely remote. You see others that want to have that flexibility. And you see some that want more of that traditional office space. And so we're trying to create a hybrid of how do you bring all of those together to meet the needs, but also being consistent with what is our culture, which is based on relationships, fun, connectedness, and collaboration. And so how do you continue to do that regardless of where you reside is the challenge we'll have in the future, and making sure that we're meeting all of our employees' needs.
Laura, have you started to think at GitHub about what the office post-COVID looks like and how you bring some people back into it?
Yep. So like Melanie said, we're not going to require anybody or force anyone to come in. We want to make sure people are comfortable and feel safe to do so. I like the phrase, humans are not thinking creatures that feel, we're feeling creatures that think. So ensuring that our employees feel safe when they come back. We know from surveys that 71% of our employees, the number one reason they want to come back is because they miss their coworkers. And so we're really going to focus on building out those spaces that support community and then encourage interaction, as well as programs to support that as well. And a lot of our refreshes, we've committed to rebuilding spaces so that at least 25% of our offices can be used for internal or external conferences, hackathons, meetings, general events, happy hours, all those kinds of things to help encourage and get people used to coming back and collaborating together.
All right. I wanted to, before we run out of time, take a question from our virtual audience. We talked a little bit earlier about some of the tools that we are relying on or that we encourage our colleagues to use from home. But the question is, what are some of the most important tools or products employers should be providing work from home employees?
Ooh, I can answer this one.
No plugging your own.
No. I really like a company. It's a vendor called PBE, Performance-Based Ergonomics, and they can do virtual ergonomic setup for employees that they can set up at their own time. As mentioned before, ergonomics are huge. You don't want your employees working with eye strain, back strain, general malaise. But we really like PBE because they can also do it internationally and ensure that people get what they need. We also offer a home office reimbursement so that employees can get that chair, that monitor, the ergonomic keyboard that they need.
That's great. I wasn't familiar with that one. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, I would like to introduce my colleague and Bloomberg reporter, Stefania Spezzati, who is the UK finance reporter in Europe. Welcome, Stefania.
Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. Thanks for being here. So we just heard perspectives from folks in the technology and design industries. Stefania, you've been reporting on how the virus has transformed finance, which has a very different culture generally from those other two industries. From what you've seen this year, do you think the virus will have a lasting impact on banks? Like, will we see the trading floor permanently shift to, people's homes in the Hamptons?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question, Mark. I mean, the financial sector, has been traditionally is probably the less flexible or the most rigid sector that, changes or because it's such a long history. So, kind of introducing changes has always been a bit difficult to the way that people work or behave in their offices. However, I will say that this time around it felt very different because it was suddenly clear, to banks that they had no chances but to adapt to, the changes of the pandemic, because suddenly workers were basically, sent home from one day to another. And you were talking about, thousands of people in the offices. And also, sometimes there are huge, those trading floors have many, many traders. So what we have seen at the beginning was just a lot of confusion because, banks were kind of thinking, okay, what do we do? Can we keep some teams in and then some others can go home? Can we use the recovery offices that they have sometimes far from the centers? So at the beginning, there was just very, confusion, but then slowly, everybody was at home, it was working from home. So, two banks were, no other chances but to adopt to it. And now I think it was immediately also clear that those changes are going to be for the long term, are going to stay here for the long term. So we have seen slowly, banks, especially those that are under pressure to cut costs, we're seeing some of them are starting to change their policies, like Deutsche Bank and HSBC in Asia, in Hong Kong, has actually announced, more flexible arrangements for workers.
And you think this will be a lasting change or just as long as they have to?
Well, for some of them, it's going to be as long as they have to. And I'm probably thinking, for the biggest US banks. So a case in point would probably be Citigroup. They have said clearly, we're happy with the working from home. We have shown that we can do it. But, at the same time, as soon as it's possible, we would probably like to have everybody back because, the creativity that you have in a working place when everybody's around is probably different from when people are, working from home. At the same time, for institutions, for banks that are a bit more under pressure to cut costs, like HSBC, for instance, they have been announcing more flexible policies. Actually, HSBC in Hong Kong is actually paying employees to stay home. They've been kind of offering a one-off payment so they could set up an ergonomic home office and work from home for as many as 4 days a week. So that basically leaves only 1 day a week where you can go to the office. So, they're kind of, it depends on the institutions. I would say that probably, again, the biggest US banks, probably they want, everybody back as soon as they can, while for other banks that are kind of suffering a bit from the cost perspective, then there would be more, lasting changes.
Wow, fascinating. So you're based in London. Do you see geographic differences between the responses from banks there in New York and in Asia?
Yeah, I mean, in London, obviously, as soon as, it was April, the banks were basically trying to use, again, those recovery sites and then realized that it was basically, there was no point sending people just to another office, people just have to be home. So, there has been immediately, people have been sent home, and I think that was the case as well in New York and in Asia. I think the difference will be the speed to which those banks will bring people back. So you would probably expect, if you talk to any lawyer in the city or that operates in the financial sector, it will tell you that probably American banks have the strongest incentive to get people back because of the problem with the compliance and monitoring employees. So American companies, financial companies, are probably a bit more aggressive than European companies from a compliance perspective. So they really would like to have you back to the office, because once you are in the office, there is no kind of privacy. There is nothing that you can hide. When you're in office, you're just walking in. So this fact of having people, at home is making things a bit more tricky and difficult, also from a compliance perspective.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned monitoring. So as this new wave of the virus hits the West, and banks continue to let employees work from home, like rather reluctantly, as you pointed out, how are the companies making sure everyone is putting in the traditional 80 hours a week that's expected of them?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing a bit of reporting on this, and it's quite stunning what we've found, because obviously we all knew that banks and the big companies are actually monitoring employees as much as they can, because they want the maximum of the productivity. But I think with the pandemic, we just went to a further step. There are compliance companies that offer those kind of a monitoring, monitor softwares. They're really making a fortune out of this pandemic at the moment, because there is an increase. There's a huge demand for this kind of software that can track if you are at your keyboard, how fast you're working, if you are sharing information that you're not supposed to share. So absolutely, the compliance topic has become huge those days, and banks are really, such as other companies, are really trying to do whatever they can, to make sure the employees are actually behaving according to the rules and not sharing confidential information, even if obviously there is a limit to what they can do, because traders are still trading from home. So if you think that before the pandemic, as a trader, you could even take your mobile phone to the bathroom, and you can use it on the trading floor. And now, I mean, you're home and you probably have kids and you probably have your wife that works, in the other room, and there is a risk that is huge for companies. So another important aspect is that, if you're thinking to save money with your real estate footprint, by selling your office and thinking, okay, no, I'm just having all my employees, everybody's going to be home because we save costs. But then you have, on the other side, you have the cost for being compliant. That is probably going to be huge as well.
So you're talking about regulatory compliance and productivity monitoring almost in the same breath, but what are these tools really for? Are they for compliance, or are they for making sure that their employees are working as hard as they want them to?
I would think they are for both. Obviously, financial companies have to are very heavily regulated. So they have, to answer to the regulator, and they have to behave in a certain way. But then, there is also another aspect of it that is basically monitoring the productivity. I mean, I've seen a software of a company that can actually monitor if you're not at your laptop, and if you're not sending enough messages, or if you're sending less messages than usual, then it would be flagged to your boss. So, I mean, it's a huge
Wow.
topic, and risk to privacy, obviously, that before the pandemic were not there.
So were they using these tools before, or are these like brand new to this time?
I would say to a certain extent, yes, but obviously the working from home has made, the demand has obviously increased for those tools, and there is obviously way more monitoring than before.
Interesting. So we're running a little low on time here, but I did want to ask you one more question. I think you mentioned a lot of the banks are want to go back to the way things were as soon as they can, get people back at their desks and into the bullpens. Once a vaccine is widely available, do you think employers will force their workers to get it?
So it's obviously a controversial, question. There is not like a straight answer to it. Much will depend also on what the government and on the geographies, what higher level the institution will do. Certainly, what's in London, probably what we will see is that banks will probably try to get a share of those vaccines, and will probably make them available for employees, and then they will probably try to encourage employees to get a shot, trying to be back to the office in safe and healthy way, if you want. So I mean, if they can force employees, that remain probably is more a question for lawyers, and they will probably tell you that there are different shades here. So on the ground of public interest, they could probably justify it as this is what they use for justifying the fact that some of them take your temperature, or they're tracking where you're going, or can inform you if there are COVID cases on your floor. So they could use it, basically to make it mandatory. But it's very controversial. So they would probably adopt a softer approach here.
Yeah. Very interesting. Well, thank you, Stefania. Next up, I'd like to introduce my colleague and technology editor in Europe, Jennifer Ryan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much, Stefania. And so what I'd like to do now is, introduce today our three speakers, and they're going to discuss the mental health challenges that have been brought by the mass shift to working from home during a global pandemic. So first, I would like to introduce Brynhild Vinsky. She's the head of global marketing at EPOS, which is a Danish audio company, and she's going to discuss the data and research that they've been conducting looking at the impact of technology on mental health while we're working from home. So Brynhild, would you like to just say hello quickly?
Hello, thank you for having me, guys. I look forward to this discussion.
That's great, thank you. So next we've got John Roa, who's been an entrepreneur since the age of 14, run a venture capital firm and advised nonprofits. And he's recently published a memoir, A Practical Way to Get Rich and Die Trying, that highlights the pressure entrepreneurs face to present themselves as geniuses and the mental health risks that can result. So hello, John, welcome to you.
Hi, guys, thanks for having me.
And last but by no means least, we have Rebecca Seal, who earlier this year published Solo, a book about working on your own from home, something she's been doing for years. Rebecca, would you like to say hello?
Hello, thanks very much for having me.
Great, thank you so much. So to kick things off, let's think about where we are right now. It's the end of 2020, and it's been an extraordinarily tough year, and people around the world have had to make changes to their daily lives. And one of the most significant for many has been working from home. And the longer this persists, the more likely it is for employees to feel stress, experience high levels of anxiety and loneliness. So we're going to discuss today how business leaders can stay connected with staff and remind them that they are not alone. So to kick things off, I'd like to start with John. Now, you've spent a lot of time talking to CEOs and entrepreneurs about how they're doing and found there's not a lot of willingness to recognize or discuss mental health issues. Can you talk about why this is? And if you can, also talk about how this great shift to working from home might be affecting that.
Yeah, thank you, and great question. This is a topic that I've been focused on for the last couple of years since I began writing my memoir, which highlights my mental health journey and decline for being an entrepreneur now for almost 25 years. And there are protected classes when it comes to mental health and their willingness and ability to speak out about it. And we've seen it kind of roll through the arts, through Hollywood, and people who are embraced for embracing their own humanity and for coming out with their struggles and challenges, and most importantly, their recovery from each. It really hasn't transcended to business yet, and we are still encouraged as business leaders to present ourselves as perfect and as geniuses and as unflappable, and anything but that looks like a risk to outside people. It looks like a slight against who we are as leaders, and it's a huge problem. The news about Tony Hsieh that we've all read recently is another great example of how much we don't know about the real struggles that business leaders have on a day-to-day basis. And 2020 has probably been the most difficult period, at least in our histories, for people in leadership positions to continue their leadership in a business setting. And so, rates of depression are at all-time highs in America. There are actually shortages of depression medications being manufactured because of how many people are taking them. Entrepreneurs and business leaders have a predisposition for mental health issues, including depression. And so our rates are always going to be higher than the average, which means that we are at at epidemic levels of that at the moment. And the working from home is a huge contribution. Well, we have great technology like you're seeing us on right now. It doesn't replace the human condition and the human interaction. And a lot of people, leaders or otherwise, are not equipped to work in environments like this. And so people are now in environments where they are going to be more lonely, more isolated, lacking that connection. And it's putting a lot of pressure on people across the board. And as you've mentioned, I hosted a series of my podcast called Leading from Home for about 3 months, where I talked to, I think, 27 business leaders and overall leaders, sports coaches, NFL coaches, and artists and CEOs. And it was remarkable how many talked about their mental health struggles, during this. And this was back in April and May. And so 6 months later, it's got to be even worse than that.
Do you feel like there's a bit of a disconnect? Because this is so intriguing that you've got on your podcast all these senior leaders who are very open with you about their mental health, but I feel like there's at the same time a bit of a stigma for sort of the average person, or even at more senior levels, as you were mentioning, this idea that if you're an entrepreneur, you've got to be a genius. You've got to keep that to yourself. So it sounds like it's almost like something that's like it's okay to talk about it on a podcast, but don't talk about it with your boss. Don't talk about it with your colleagues. Am I overstating that, or? No,
you're not overstating it. There is a piece of it, but it's also because I lead with my own vulnerability through my book, through my podcast. I have bared everything that I've dealt with, and I have seen as bad as your mental health conditions can get. I've been hospitalized. I've suffered a mental break. I've dealt with substance abuse issues and self-destructive behavior. And so when somebody knows they're talking to somebody who has dealt with that, they're going to automatically be more vulnerable. And so I create a space that allows that conversation to take place. But you're not going to hear them then go repeat that if they're on, CNBC later that day talking to, a reporter. And so it really is about these rare safe spaces that we get that I try to create. But that is definitely not, going to continue across the board. Okay. I think we're going to come back to this point later in our discussion. But for now, what I'd like to do is, you've mentioned this point about working from home and how this puts people, it puts people in a position that they're not really used to. And Brynhild at EPOS has, been doing some interesting research into the strain that's been placed on workers who are stuck at home. And this is from more of a technological and a communications perspective. Could you talk a little bit about that, about your study and what you found?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually done 2 surveys, and one of them, the first one we did, was more on how audio affects us as human beings. And that we actually did pre-COVID. So the results from that was really stunning as well, how we see how audio affects us. And in the survey we did, we saw that 95% of the respondents, they said that they suffer concentration issues due to sonic setback. And that's pre-corona. And I think if we do the survey again now, we're going to see that that number is a lot higher. We also in the survey saw that 42% said that they started to use virtual collaboration tools to save money instead of flying to meetings, for instance. And 41% said that they started doing virtual meetings. Can you talk a little bit more about that difficulty that you mentioned in the first study, the 95% struggling with their audio? Can you talk a little bit more about what the issues are there for those people and what the technical problems might have been? Oh, gosh. We have light sensors in the office, and the light just went out. Awesome. That is 2020 in a nutshell. It's 2020. We're saving power. Okay. Sorry about that. Yes. So it's yes, okay. The 95% experience sonic setbacks in general. And what is really interesting to see And what we do a lot of surveys on also in our R&D team is how audio affects brain. And we have seen an increase in brain fatigue. Some also say Zoom fatigue has become a word of this year, but we see a really a higher increase in brain fatigue, which is what people don't know necessarily is that unlike other sensors, the brain picks up sounds on a different pace, and it finds it trickier to kind of put that into stimuli. So that really affects or stimulates the cortisol, stress hormone. And as more stress hormone is released in the body, the more you experience stress. So I think the follow-up survey we did earlier, or in November actually, we asked employees into their willingness to invest in audio tools now, post or mid-COVID. And the willingness now is 78%. And the willingness in the first survey was 43%. So it's a big increase for businesses to actually invest in audio tools in general.
It's interesting because it sounds like that's kind of a way that businesses are kind of starting to recognize the mental health issues, or at least the issues that are relate to the comfort and ability of their staff to communicate, which is very important in dealing with the strains that we're all sort of facing at present. I'd like to move on to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. I just said yes. And just one thing of this as well is that in that same survey we did pre-COVID, we saw that 25% actually feel stressed and a bit even embarrassed during meeting situations where they don't hear people well enough. So you can imagine this year throughout working from home, how many times you said, "Excuse me, what? Can you hear me? I think you have an echo or you're muted." That's kind of the words of this year. And that actually really increases the stress level of people.
Yeah, and I think it also contributes to isolation, this feeling of isolation in this really important way, because you feel like you're not being heard. And this would be an interesting point for Rebecca to jump in on, actually, because she's actually thought quite a lot about the risks of loneliness for independent workers. And Rebecca, you've also looked at how digital communications can both alleviate and exacerbate this loneliness. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think what we've seen this year, and I think what everybody's probably experienced, is that you, in the absence of any other options, digital communications are a brilliant boon. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I think we all used Zoom in particular to socialize and to try and maintain connections with the people that we cared about. But as time has passed, as you mentioned, Zoom fatigue has begun to set in. And there's some quite interesting research, which I'm sure you're already aware of, about the way in which Zoom overloads the brain. So you get too many pieces of data, too many pieces of information coming at you when you're trying to have a Zoom conversation. For example, this setup here, where there are three people looking directly at me and I can see all three of your faces at once. That's you'd never get that in normal life. And our brains are constantly trying to deal with the fact that they're getting this halfway house between real conversation and real communication. And yeah, it's two-dimensional and often it's slightly delayed and there's a blur to it. And you can't really see what my hands are doing, and you can't see the rest of my body. So we're missing all of these subconscious cues that we would normally get when we're part of a real life conversation. So one of the things that I try and encourage and advise people to do is take more phone calls and actually get off video calls, because our brains are much better at dealing with just a flow of audio, and we can infer quite a lot from the sound of somebody's voice. And we're not then struggling with the extra information that we can't quite process, which is not quite a conversation with a real person, but not quite not either. So, yeah, and I think that because of that inadequacy that this kind of communication has, it exacerbates feelings of loneliness again, because you sort of think you're connected, but you're not connected. And, social media can do a similar job in that you feel as though you are seeing lots of different people and you are connected to lots of different people, but it doesn't entirely scratch the human itch that we have, because they're all sort of simulacrums of what we might want or need. And obviously this year we need real people, and we're not really able to connect with real people in the ways that we've historically been able to. So that's naturally going to lead to more loneliness too. So it's sort of a perfect storm. For all that, I'm grateful that we have these ways of communicating at all. So it's a mixture.
Yeah, I guess it's quite tough on the worker who's stuck on her own at home, because you've got this need to see another human face and have a human connection. And it seems like you've got this tantalizing Zoom app or any other app that you might like, Skype or what have you. And you feel like, oh, I can just click on and see these faces and that'll sort it out. Or even, you feel like this deal I'm trying to put together feels a bit funny. Think I'd better, hop on a 3-way video conference call or 5-way video conference call and get it sorted out. But that seems like that might not necessarily be the answer, or it's not always the answer.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we need a mixture of different inputs, and that's not to say I'm against video calling or group calls, but I think certainly ones where there are many people on them are particularly exhausting and particularly unhelpful, especially from a loneliness point of view, because that's even weirder for our brains if you've got 16 pairs of eyes looking at you, or 30, or I did a talk to 70 people the other day on the screen, and it's just weird. You have a little number in the corner that goes up and down, and you think, oh God, is everyone leaving? And why? It's just, there's all these weird inputs that we wouldn't normally get in real life that are, that we're just not we're not designed to cope with. I mean, there's a really interesting piece of information which I got in a book called Hyperfocus by a writer called Chris Bailey, who says that we are, given 11 million bits of information per second. This is not my area of science, but so I'm not sure if this is precisely right. But we're capable of dealing with about 40. And that's at the best of times, right? That's before you add in Skype calls and social media and our phones being right next to us all the time and all of that stuff. We are just not built for the level of data that washes over us. And I think just understanding and accepting that about ourselves and about our teams and our colleagues is really critical. We have to be kind and forgiving to ourselves, because we are not built for this. We're not built for this year at all.
I mean, it's interesting because, John, if we go back to the people that you've been speaking with, particularly in your podcast, I mean, is what Rebecca's saying something that you think, and also in your own business experience, is that something that's really going to resonate with people who are entrepreneurs and people who are operating at very senior executive levels? There's this plea for them to be a bit more kind, to take a bit more time, but they've got to get it done. They've got to get the deal done. They've got to get their clients on board. They've got a lot of people they've got to keep happy. I mean, can that actually land?
It's a tough one, because as business leaders and entrepreneurs or CEOs, we're in survival mode most of the time, and we're going to do whatever it takes. Normally, we make those decisions in isolation as well. So we might not be as conscious of the outcomes of our decisions, or how it might affect every employee that's under our umbrella, or for some of the mental health concerns that might come along in a long tail from a decision that we had to make from a leadership perspective. And so we can be a bit isolated to those kind of more kind of nuanced concerns that comes along with the decisions that we're making in real time that we think are the most important to be in leadership positions, to keep the company surviving, to make hard calls. But it's happened to me before that we can lose sight of the implications of those, especially down to the employee level.
So in the before times, how would you have solved this? This would have been popping by someone's desk, taking them out for a lunch. But I mean, what do you do now? Or what do you think people can do?
It's very hard. And, it's one of those things that every company is so different in their construction and in their culture and how they deal with this even in the first place. And some companies are far more kind of open door, hugs and kisses, and everyone's very communal and sharing information, sharing their stories and sharing their lives. Other companies never had that. And so I think that you have to look at what your culture was and then find ways to recreate that in this new era. Thankfully, this era is not permanent. What's going to come out of the back of 2020 is some kind of hybrid, probably, right? And so we're going to have companies that are more fluid in their working situations. We're going to have companies that allow more flexibility in terms of working from home or being remote, but also reopen their offices to either the roles or types of people that need that environment. So I think we'll see a better form of flexibility in working environments. I don't think that anybody who's making either extreme call by saying we're going 100% virtual, we're never going to have an office again, we're never going to see each other, or somebody who says we all must be back in the office unless you're in that chair in June, you're fired. I don't think either solution is going to be the right one, and business leaders will find the right hybrid for their company and culture.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of leading on to a much broader question is, you make this interesting point about culture, but what else? And that's something that managers need to pay attention to if they're trying to figure out how to look after their employees. But what else do they need to look at? I mean, what are some tools that managers can kind of put in their kit in order to make sure that their employees are being listened to and their staff are being looked after, with the end of every team and every company achieving the results that they want to achieve in a very difficult operating environment?
Well, I think it's empowering the listeners. I think that you have people inside your organization, whether that be HR or operations or some other roles, that are closer to your employees than you might be as a business leader. And so empowering them to listen and empowering them with either tools or controls to garner feedback, to then act on that feedback, and to make sure there is direct and flowing communication channels. As for all the downsides that we've acknowledged about these formats, if you put 100 people from a company together, it can have some upside of saying, wow, I'm not alone. I can see human beings that are doing the same job I am. So whatever those channels are and whatever you can do. But to me, and in my experience, it's always empowering those who can listen to actually make change. And so there were many times when I ran my last company that I couldn't even tell you how many employees I had. I didn't know anybody that was new, their name. I wouldn't even say hi to new people anymore. I was that busy. But what I did is I empowered my human resources groups and my operations groups to be heavily engaged in the well-being of our employees, and then directly report that to me so I could make any changes that needed to be made. But it was all about delegating and empowering that communication if you can't do it yourself.
Did you feel like that worked, that was the right way to go? Or, looking back, do you feel like you wish you would have taken a bit more time or tried to carve out some time to make that connection?
Of course I wish, but I wish a lot of things. Being pragmatic, my time was better spent serving my role as the chief executive. And my HR leads and my operational leads, their time was best spent, really focusing on the well-being of our team. And that blocking and tackling worked for us. Now, would I have loved to take every new employee out to dinner and get to know them and their lives? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that would have been not only impossible, but it would have been almost irresponsible in my role as the chief executive and fiduciary. So I think we have to be just honest with what our bandwidth is, what we can do, but then again, not ignore anything, but properly delegate and empower people to do their jobs.
I think that's a really interesting point, this idea about being honest about your bandwidth. And that will come to some surprising conclusions. You've got a conclusion that I don't think a lot of people would have predicted would be the right one, but for you, that was right. But I think
and
also
it's the case. Sorry, just to make one more point, it's the case that a lot of entrepreneurs really can cause a lot of strife and turmoil with their existence, because we are generally quite empathetic. We want to be around our people. We're very proud that we even have employees, and so we want to create those connections. We want to know everybody, and once you become removed from that's one of the biggest mental health drivers that takes us down as entrepreneurs, is losing that human connection and feeling removed from your own baby, the thing that you created. And so that is one of these things that you hear a lot about in the sadder stories of entrepreneurship that kind of starts that isolation and loneliness as the leaders.
This point you made about empowering your staff, I mean, it made me think of the point that Brunhild was making earlier on, is that, you've got all of a sudden companies looking more to invest in their technology, and you feel like that might be something that just sounds a bit nice, but Brunhild, it sounds like it's a bit more crucial.
Yes, I would definitely say it's crucial because you have to equip your workforce with the right tools to do their job. That's one thing, but it's also tools that will increase their performance and really help them do their job at the best. So I definitely think it's crucial. And I think just wanted to add one point to the video conferencing part, because I agree with what was said as well. And I think one thing that we've seen a lot is that we see, there's been news stories about this, but face surgery is going up because people see themselves much more in meetings. And when you attend meetings, you normally don't see yourself. But in a Teams Zoom world, working from home, we see ourselves all the time. So we don't just see the people in the meeting, but also ourselves. And that's also a stress factor for many.
Yeah, it's not something that makes anyone happy, seeing your own face talking at you in a conference call. But I mean, Rebecca, you've been used to this for a very long time, and then your book, you were working on it before the pandemic, about your book about working on your own, and so I reckon you've got quite a lot to say about the things that you would wish companies would realize about what are the challenges that their staff face working on their own. I mean, is there a change that you wish companies would just all implement straight away?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult one, because I one of the things that I've noticed in the last few days in conversation with people about this stuff is that leaders are just as exhausted as everybody else, and I'm slightly reluctant on one level to say you must absolutely do this, X or Y, because this year has been shattering for everybody. And as much as our teams might be shattered, so are our leaders. And so that's an immense challenge. But I think one of the critical things that we have to do is sort of what we've discussed already, is that we just have to listen very, very carefully to the individual stories which are being told in each of the homes and houses where our teams and colleagues might be, because this pandemic story has played out so differently for every individual, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for any company, but there also isn't one for most individual people either. So I think, I mean, we have to be really committed to listening and to finding out what people need and whether they've got those things. And those things include, the space in which to work. I mean, one of the things that I'm keenly aware of is that, well, someone at my age and stage, 40, and been working, in this career for a long time, I've got a house and space, and, I've got a desk, but I know of people who are working on ironing boards still, 4 people on a kitchen counter in a shared house, where they don't even have a sitting room because they converted it into a bedroom. So, are we asking those people enough about how they are and whether they've got what they need? Should we be thinking about renting small spaces, micro hubs for individual organizations to get those people out of their bedrooms and off their sofas and away from kitchen counters and ironing boards? Are those questions being asked? And I think unless you had the most incredible culture as an office, as a company or business, before all of this, there will be staff in your organization who are suffering, because working from home is incredibly intense. And it took me 6 years to work out that I was burning out, and another 5 to write a book about it. It's like it's a really hard way of working. It's very, very isolating potentially, and for all that it gives us greater flexibility, it also allows our work to bleed into parts of our life where it really has no right to be. And while I'm really happy to see flexible working being something which is part of the international conversation all of a sudden, I'm also really sad to know that people are working at least an extra 2 hours a day. Remote workers data shows that they're working an extra 2 hours a day. And beyond that, quite a lot of people are doing up to 65 hours a week of on time, because of the speed with which they check their emails when they wake up, and the last look that they have before they go to bed. So I guess what my thing, the magic wand I would like is for leaders to think about all those things, like, are your staff okay, and how much is it going to cost you if you don't make sure they're okay? Because if you don't care on a human level, and I'm sure most people do, but if you don't care on a human level, then recognize the fact that replacing those people in the next few months because they've got RSI or back pain, or they're signed off work with mental health issues, that's really expensive. There are human costs and financial costs to that. So those are the questions that I hope all organizations are beginning to ask, because we're all going to pay a price.
It's interesting because there's a question that's come in from the audience, and we're getting towards the end of the session, but it's a fascinating question. So maybe I'll ask it quickly, and then if you can jump in with a very quick prior response. one or two of you, that would be great. So you've got staff working from home. This can lead employees to suspect that some of their colleagues are not fully engaged. So what should a manager do in that situation?
What can you do when you think somebody's not fully engaged?
Yeah, or you suspect that the staff are thinking this of each other.
Well, I think, of course, yeah, sorry, go.
No, go.
Yeah, well, I think, of course, you need to have trust in your coworkers and colleagues in general. What we did when we had the lockdown, 100% lockdown here, is that we had daily 30-minute stand-ups in the morning where we just met virtually over coffee and talked about what we're going to do today and challenges we've had, celebrations. So everyone was kind of in loop with what everyone worked on. But I think, of course, on that question in particular, it's important that you as a manager make sure that there's trust towards your team in general.
I think that's a great note to end on, because unfortunately, I think that might be all we have time for. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We're really grateful. But before we close the session, there's an issue that we really should remember, and it speaks to this point that John was making very early on. We're getting in the end of 2020. So some people who have been coping well at the start of the pandemic might now be really worn down by the strain, and it is the holiday season, and that's a very difficult time for a lot of people anyway. So do take on board, the advice offered by our speakers and see how you can implement it in your own lives. It's probably worth taking some extra care with each other and with ourselves at this point. So that's all we have time for today. So to our audience, both within and beyond the Bloomberg community, thank you so much for joining us. And remember, we are very active on social media. So join the conversation there using #TheYearAhead. You can follow the conversation with @Bloomberg Live on LinkedIn, Twitter, or like us on Facebook. And to learn more about our other upcoming events, please visit our website at BloombergLive.com. Thanks very much to our sponsor, EPOS, and to everyone who joined us today. And I would like to draw your attention to two pieces of research that EPOS have kindly provided. They're entitled Prepare Your Business for Hybrid Work and Quality Audio with Sound Investment. They can both be found either at the bottom of the agenda page or under the speaker tab. And don't forget, you can watch this on demand. Thanks very much.